On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A, we talk with licensed professional counselor Brandee Smith about how to identify real love versus fake love in regular and toxic relationships. Plus, we talk about infidelity, sex, and a very common question, how can I ever trust again? Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A. I am Brandon Chadwick, and this is a podcast that interviews mental health professionals, lawyers, researchers, and authors about narcissistic and domestic abuse. And before we get into our episode, let me state that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please do not substitute the show for medical advice. If you are struggling, please do reach out to the current professional you use, or please do call your local domestic abuse agency. Speaking of professionals, we just started our own directory of mental health professionals at abusetherapy.org. Yes, that is correct, abusetherapy.org. If you are looking for someone to talk to about narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, please do go there to find someone. Using one of the professionals from our directory helps support the show. We'll also be adding as many diverse professionals over the coming weeks. And if you are a professional looking to be part of our directory, please do email me at directory@abusetherapy.org. Also attached to the directory is a community forum where you can ask general questions about narcissistic and domestic abuse, but only the professionals on our directory, like Brandee Smith today, will be the ones that can answer. So hopefully you all take advantage of that as well. And before I get out of my own way and start the show, thank you to everyone who came to our podcast website at narcissistapocalypse.com and filled out an application to be on our sister podcast, Narcissist Apocalypse Survivor Stories. If you haven't received an email from me, please do check your junk mail. I almost forgot one little thing as well. We also have a narcissistic abuse support group on Facebook. It's a great group of people on there. Everyone is helpful and nice, and that can be found at facebook.com/groups/narcissistapocalypse. And now it's time for the show. Here is my conversation with Brandee Smith. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A. With me today, I have Brandee Smith, who is a licensed professional counselor, licensed chemical dependency counselor with a focus on trauma, and one of her specialties is infidelity as well. She is a therapist with a non-judgmental environment where clients feel validated, acknowledged, and respected, which, as many of you know, is not easy to find in a therapist these days. She is in Austin, Texas, online. Her website is fortifycounselingservices.com, which is FORTIFY counselingservices.com. She is statewide in Texas. Brandee Smith, thank you for being on our show today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So today we will be discussing real intimacy versus fake intimacy amongst many things. And I guess when we discuss this, a big thing in narcissistic abuse is love bombing. So, we're trying to decipher a lot of people, like what is real and what is fake. So at first, can you define what love bombing is for us?
Sure. Love bombing is that kind of just showering a person with some really dramatic and over-the-top kind of attention and affection, and not just sort of that honeymoon period, but this very, sort of powerful combination of the things that someone would do or say to just be really compelling, and that kind of attention that we all really want, just the authentic kind, not love bombing.
So when it comes to real versus fake, how does someone know what is real?
I think it's really important, that we trust our gut. I think there's a loss of trusting our gut in terms of narcissistic abuse. That's kind of one of the tools, is to throw us off recognizing who we are. So I sort of see in my practice, I think the merging of empathy and vulnerability is a great way to define intimacy. And so, I think if someone's empathetic, we can feel the same as another person, understand, personal distress that they might be experiencing, and having compassion. So there's that actual part of that feeling. Then there's also the cognitive aspect, the ability to be able to do that. And vulnerability, when we tie that in with empathy, that is this risk of allowing ourselves to be hurt. And so I think there's a few ways that you can look at that. In a relationship, is the other party that you're with, are they equally invested, right, in terms of their resources? Are they giving as much as they're asking for? I think another thing, we can really consider is, are both parties kind of engaging in the same level of risk? Are the same things on the line for your partner as you are putting on the line? And I think also a really good
Sorry, can you explain that a little bit more for me? I guess the risk factor and how to be able to identify that.
Well, sure. So I think part of that is are things reciprocal? Like, is there an imbalance really in the amount of give and take between partners? So am I, if I'm being asked to give a whole lot of my time, is that something that my partner is willing to invest to? If there are, certain parameters of a relationship about how much we talk or needs being met, or is there an equal investment? If that's not the case, there may be some ulterior motive.
So in the case of if someone is overdoing things at the beginning and overdoing it and they're not taking themselves, is that something you're looking at as a red flag that at this moment it's just too lopsided one way and you're looking for something that is just in the middle? Anything that is stretched either way is wrong.
Right. I think if I'm extremely, if I'm supportive and I can depend on my partner to be supportive, I would expect that in times when I need to be supported, I'm also getting that. I mean, I think the whole thing is about healthy relationships really is a lot of balance. If something feels overwhelming and sort of, I think, a challenge to trust, I think that they're going to give the same thing that I'm going to give. I think that's a cause for concern.
And going into these relationships, from my other show, I hear a lot of people saying that they have preconceived notions of what a relationship is and what a marriage is supposed to be. And, people always have in their mind is like, people fight. Relationships happen, people fight. So at a certain point, there's this preconceived notion of what a relationship is supposed to be. So people stick it out. And they don't realize that this is, not real love that they are receiving. And I guess they make excuses in a certain way for the behavior that is going on. So controlling behavior sometimes is seen as love. So is there a way for people to decipher control? I guess that would be a fake intimacy, how some people use control as make it feel as love or things along those lines. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is there these toxic behaviors that are being passed off as love, and how do people decipher that?
I think there are so many influences about what you were asking about in terms of what is okay. Am I asking too much? Is this reasonable? Should I just tolerate it? Because I think when narcissism is involved, the part of the biggest influence is making person, the survivor, feel responsible for all those things that are happening. Right? And so if I'm supposed to be patient or allow somebody their privacy or, that this is the way things are supposed to be, any of the things that I've learned that might not be so healthy, either in my experience or from the culture, says that I think that sort of is highlighted as, and then it kind of resonates with us. Oh, they're saying this thing that I have heard and know of before, so I must be overreacting because it resonates as something that might have sounded true in the past. And so I think that's an easy tool for a person in a toxic relationship to use. And it really does. I think that shifts the focus off of what your partner is supposed to be doing in terms of their heavy lifting versus what you're supposed to be doing. So the focus is always on a need for one person to be better, do better, change. I think that's just, again, out of balance.
So for the most of these situations, real intimacy versus fake intimacy really comes to watching for balance, and that being the predominant red flag, especially with all these situations.
I think so. I mean, if somebody is attempting to manage the way we think versus promoting our health and I think that's an easy thing to see in terms of knowing that's not in our best interest. We would always want our partner to be acting in a way that supports our best interest.
And in narcissistic abuse, one of the biggest issues people have, or not the biggest issues, one of the biggest things or common threads is infidelity, and that is one of your specialties, people that are dealing with the aftermath of infidelity or are currently in it. So why is infidelity a big common thread within narcissistic abuse?
Well, I think if we break that down, it really fits the pattern. It really just, infidelity in terms of narcissistic abuse, it kind of just extends that pattern of behavior that we know exists with narcissism. And so I think the only difference is we've now added other people to the mix. It's abusive behavior that previously existed within the confines of the relationship. Well, now it exists outside the relationship. And so, I think all those common threads, the things to be looking for is that with any abusive situation, but particularly with narcissism, is that, the insatiable need for validation, the sense of entitlement, that even, and I think when infidelity is concerned, even when that means jeopardizing a partner's health, that lack of empathy. So, in terms of infidelity, there is this lack of compassion about the inevitable consequences that will come when, and they almost always are, when affairs are discovered. And really, I think it's important to note too, we're not just even talking about the narcissist partner at this point, although that's really important, but also the affair partner. And they may not be the most sympathetic figure in the whole story, I guess, but they're still a person, and they're sort of being drawn into this unhealthy web. And then that feeling of narcissism that's common to narcissists, that's feeling special and that they deserve special treatment. So, in the context of narcissistic abuse, it's really just an extension of all of these characteristics, all these traits that we find, patterns of behavior, to add an additional person into the mix.
And is there a way to, if you're having a gut feeling that something is wrong and you're not able to put a finger on it, is there a way to decipher, or are there common signs of infidelity where people can start looking or be more aware of what's actually possibly going on?
Sure. Again, I would always trust people. I would always encourage people, to trust their gut, right? Which is a hard thing to do when someone's, methodically trying to throw you off your sense of identity. And so but always rely on that. I think really in terms of infidelity, the first thing to do, which I think a lot of couples overlook or partners overlook, is define it. Have I been clear with my partner about what constitutes infidelity? And I think a lot of people just assume that they know. But what I find in my office is that they don't. If you ask somebody, what would it mean if for me to be unfaithful? What do you consider infidelity? And then you share your belief about that. I think people sometimes struggle to do that. So first of all, I think we really need to get on the same page about that. Once a couple defines it, once we get to a shared understanding of that, there are some pretty reliable indicators that somebody, might be up to no good. I think, and important, before I get into that, though, I think it's important to keep in mind that someone who's being unfaithful may exhibit none of these signs and be involved in an affair, and somebody who displays all of them may not be in an affair. So I think it's important to just, ask questions and communicate. So I think there's when there's a special attention, I think, to the issue of privacy. That's one. If this is all of a sudden a new sort of attention to, well, I have a right to privacy, keeping things secure that weren't secure, passcodes, those kinds of things. That's a warning sign of somebody who might be trying to hide something. I think emotional distance is a good indicator, withdrawing from the relationship in general for that feeling of coldness. A lot of times people who are being unfaithful, you may notice them becoming really critical, even to the point of being cruel, just angry and generally dissatisfied with the person that they're with. The issue of control comes up a lot. And interestingly, what I find is that the person who's doing these things that are sort of outside the relationship is constantly accusing the other party of doing that. And I think it sort of throws up a defense shield a little bit about that to hide behind. If you notice your partner is away a lot, and they might not have been before, working late, working more often, traveling, needing to be out of town, that's something. And all of these, I think, are important if there's a shift in what was normal. That old one about someone paying more attention to their physical appearance, that's really true. There is a more heightened sense of awareness of what one looks like. And then just being inappropriately defensive, I think, as kind of underlies all of that. We ought to be able to speak freely to a partner, ask questions without someone feeling accused or defensive.
And when you're treating people and you have them inside, you have different modalities, I guess. You're someone comes in and you work with different modalities. When it comes to narcissistic abuse and infidelity, is there a specific type of modality that you use with people in these situations, or is it every person is different and every person deserves a different type of treatment?
I think absolutely. I think you got to be very flexible in terms of taking in the whole story of a person. I mean, I think what I've learned about therapy is that there are some, really consistent patterns about people who have experienced trauma. There's patterns with people who have survived a narcissistic relationship. But we do want to sort of take a little of this, take a little of that. And I think depending on the evolution of the person, their recovery, I think we do sort of take a little bit from everything. There's so many things to consider about how a person comes to be where they are at the moment in time, that they present themselves for therapy. And so there's all kinds of relationship history, people who grew up in dysfunctional homes and experienced abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, any kind of abuse growing up, there's this predisposition to not understanding a healthy relationship. And so sometimes we think about the way people are thinking and sort of focus on testing those ideas. Sometimes people just need an empathetic ear, a place to just talk. It's really wonderful, particularly with trauma survivors and narcissist survivors, to watch. I'm very confident that when someone walks in my office, they absolutely have the way back to feeling healthy already there. We just sort of sit and look at the ways to feel safe to bring those out and act on those things. Boundaries, assertive communication, self-esteem, all of those things. There's a whole bunch of different ways that people need to have that reinforced for them. And so, trauma survivors, the growth and the healing, when people get the outcome they want, it's just breathtaking to watch that process happen.
Are boundaries one of the biggest things you work on in these situations?
Absolutely. And I think that kind of circles back to what we were talking about a little bit before, is that, I find a lot of people feel like they're asking too much. And here's what I know. You can ask for whatever you want. And every person has the right to say yes or no, that works for me, or it doesn't work for me. And so now, we're talking about people who are relatively healthy, functioning folks, maybe not someone who's got a diagnosed mental illness and is in sort of active periods of that. But in terms of, if I say, it's important to me that we have financial goals that we focus on. If someone says that, you're really overreacting, you're this or you're that, and it's okay to say, actually, it's important to me, and I'm going to sort of stand my ground about that. But that's okay, right? We don't have to agree. And if it becomes, I think, to a point of importance where it would change the dynamic of the relationship, that's okay too. And so maybe we're not compatible. I think the things that people forget is we don't have to be upset or hurt by that, not being compatible with a person. We can just sort of be neutral about it and say, this isn't healthy for me. So we either need to make these changes, or I may need to, consider an alternative.
So in a way, real intimacy, bringing this all around, real intimacy versus fake intimacy gets in the way of truly finding out if you're a compatible human being in a sense.
Tell me more. What do you? I'm not sure I understand.
That because of the dynamic of it, of one person is obviously overdoing it, but the other person who's receiving that love bombing is then, I guess, underdoing it because they're receiving it. There's nothing that is reciprocal. So boundaries at this point kind of get thrown out of the window. So you're unable to actually see, because you're within this type of abuse, you're unable to ask for what you want, or do those types of things. You're really unable. You're put in a position where you're unable to see if you actually are compatible human beings.
Absolutely, because there's that sort of process, that cycle that we fall into, where love bombing is concerned, and other abuse patterns too, where there's this showering of attention and love bombing and everything's perfect, and then that narrative switches and it's not that way anymore, and that sort of, I think, throws off a person who's like, well, hold on, wait a second, how do I get back to that place? Everything was fine, and then this sort of complete disregard that happens in the cycle of abuse, and then that honeymoon period starts again, and it's very hard to sort of regain our footing when we are not sure. Now we're sort of thrown off about, well, what is my reality? I don't know what is normal now and what's not normal. It's hard for me to differentiate. because I keep trying to hit the target and then it moves.
So we have some questions from our audience, and I was wondering if you wanted to answer some of them today.
You sure? I'd love to.
All right. So first questions. Hi. The sex with my narcissist was very intense and the best I have ever had. So when he began to cheat on me, it was hard to understand because our sex life was so good. Then eventually sex started to dry up. What makes them so good in bed? And is this part of the way of their bonding? And is cheating a way to get this bond constantly, like an instant mental gratification? Or do they see sex as an obligation once the chase is over?
So that's a lot, and I think there's some fundamental answers really about narcissists and sex, right? So interestingly, the all of the things that are kind of triggered, those things I mentioned before about the need for validation and affirmation and entitlement, all of those things. Those are not necessarily triggered in regard to sex or sexual situations, I think. And so that may be a place, if they are triggered, where a narcissist just sort of completely engages that sex and sexuality as another tool of control and, sexual exploitation, sexual entitlement, those kinds of things come up. And so I think when you have a really great sex life, that would track in terms of the pattern that we see is that this is great, I feel very connected. But when we talk about a bond with a narcissist, what we're really talking about is more of a trauma bond. And so because we can feel most vulnerable in sex, I think that is a really compelling part of weaponry, I think, against a person who you are trying to gain control over or to serve in the function of one partner versus the other. So I think, that very beginning part of sex, which, let's be honest, everybody knows that there's a honeymoon period about sex. Sex becomes less spontaneous, less sort of exciting, and as a relationship goes on. But the bond, I think, that is created in a narcissistic relationship becomes one more of dysfunction than actually growing, feeling closer to one another.
All right. Next question. Thank you. That was a very good answer. Next question. I'm out of my relationship and it's hard to trust again, especially when it comes to cheating. I'm always suspect of what my new boyfriend is up to. Is he really out with his friends? I feel like I'm now becoming my jealous ex, and it's painful to think about. Any tips about trusting again?
I think this is really hard because it's, the most important directive that our brain has for us is to keep us safe, right? It's this idea and that's emotionally safe, physically safe. And so when that gets triggered and we're fearful that we're going to get hurt, it's very hard to sort of open ourselves up to that again, right? Which is, kind of that idea of fake intimacy versus real intimacy. If I'm protecting myself, I can't really completely give myself over to somebody. But when I do, if I have experience that says they might hurt me, I'm a little more reluctant to do that. So, but man, is this common? I see it a lot. And I think setting expectations in a relationship and engaging in really clear, assertive communication early and often, that's really key. I don't think it's helpful when I sort of watch this pattern of communication where people don't really say what they mean because either they don't want to start a fight or they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. There's a way to express your needs, I think, with kindness and compassion, and get those needs met, and also, listen to your partner's needs. And so I think the most important tip I have for trusting again, really, is just deciding that you're going to do that. Feeling jealous, it's just this really unpleasant combination of fear and insecurity. we have this way of convincing ourselves that everything is on the line, and it's just not true. This relationship is not the thing that is going to make us happy and healthy. In fact, I don't think a relationship can be happy and healthy until we are individually comfortable and stable and having a fulfilling life, on our own. I think, the idea of forgiveness comes up for sure when we're talking about trusting again. And that may be the person you're with, and that may be a person from a long time ago. But forgiveness is really a big part of that.
When I listen to so many people's stories, one of the things this question kind of reminds me of is a lot of people who survive narcissistic abuse eventually feel that they are acting or feeling like their abuser, and they question themselves if they are the narcissist themselves. And I think this is just, one of those emotions in the aftermath of everything that may have been there beforehand. It just wasn't bubbled up to the surface that I guess they're still dealing with, because it is a common thing where I think I'm going to say a over 50% of the people that have dealt with it start feeling or have this, I guess, duality of, am I the narcissist? Am I not? Or am I the one that actually went with it? So they're having a trouble of the balance of who they are in a sense. And do you see that come up in your work?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think there's nothing more difficult than trying to sort of regain this sense of, am I okay? Are they right? Am I asking too much? Because I think one of the indicators, that I spoke about is someone who is projecting those things they're doing onto you. It's very disconcerting to have a belief and then sort of have that kind of undermined by whether someone's, mocking or sort of degrading your needs or concerns, and then to actually now you're on your heels because you're being accused of those exact behaviors. It's very toxic, and that those feelings of self-doubt that come up, those are hard to shake, because in general, even when we're not experiencing a relationship like that, in healthy relationships and in life, we just have self-doubt. I think that's something that narcissists hone in on and use that to their advantage to say, you're not as okay as you think you are. You should be more patient. You should trust me. You should behave this way. And if there's some, sort of seed of truth to that, which we all experience some level of self-doubt, it's just really exploited and exacerbated in terms of relating to this other person now.
Well, that's a big thing that I hear a lot is even in the lies that they're being told, there's a speck of truth within that lie that still makes an abuse survivor question everything. Even though they know there's a lie, there's that one speck of truth that's in there that keeps them holding on and focusing on that as if it is a truth about themselves.
And I think that's why that works. And I think that sort of abusive behavior works because I think, we're all sort of afraid that we're being, too suspicious or too judgmental or asking too much. And so when someone can kind of find that weakness or worry in us and then sort of turn it around and use it against us instead of sort of approaching that with care and concern, I think that's a powerful weapon because it resonates in us as, I really do need to be watching out for that. And look, they just figured that out. They're right. And that's worrisome. It just sort of causes us to question things that we believe we know. And once we start doing that, it's a real slippery slope.
And the last question, I'm going to alter this slightly. So someone sent in a question that said, do all narcissists cheat? But I'm just going to alter it a tiny bit, which would be how I guess, how do you identify? Actually, I'm going to scrap that.
Okay.
I had it in my mind before of what I was actually going to say, and I was listening to you, and I forgot to write it down. So I was trying to multitask.
I don't do that very well.
So last question: do all narcissists cheat?
First, I think it's important to. I mean, it's just sort of in my nature to say. I don't like to say all people do any one thing of a group. So I hate to characterize all members of any group in that way, but even people with narcissism. But, that being said, research shows that people who have a positive association, right, with narcissistic traits, there's a higher likelihood of infidelity. And so I think, if we dig a little deeper into that, when we're trying to predict behavior, personality and trait is only a useful predictor when our personality system is activated. So in other words, like sexual situations may or may not be kind of an area that is triggered for a narcissist to sort of engage in the abusive behavior. So if that's not something that sort of is central and sort of flagged in the brain, I think, and I don't think that's on a conscious level. I think it's just sort of the kind of psychological connections that are happening for narcissists. It may not be a component. It may not, infidelity or acting out in sexual ways may not be a tool that sort of seems useful or important, I think, in terms of a relationship.
But I guess for one of the reasons for the ones that do cheat, would it be, in a sense, in their mind, they are getting, they're not thinking of you when they're doing it. You have you're not on their mind in that. It's for their own gratification, and they don't think about your feelings. But if you were to be the one to talk to other people and their jealousy would kick in, it's really people look at it as this person has a one-way street philosophy here, but it would mostly be around the fact that that hits their emotional wound, because they're only thinking about their needs, which is why a narcissist would get angry at you, but for them it's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, there's that sense of entitlement, right? I think that they are, owed the right to experience what they want sexually. Sorry that hurts your feelings or violates, some of the things that we've established as, or what I would want in a healthy relationship. This, I think there's, it's all of those things. There is this real discrepancy between equal treatment, equal expectations, who's giving what to the relationship. And so I think there is a real disregard for you look at the long-term fallout. I mean, that's a health risk for one thing. But to know that all of these things apply to the narcissist and are threatening and really sort of what's the right word? I guess the double standard, right, that really applies a lot of times in these relationships is that I'm entitled to do this. You're not making me happy sexually, so that's why I did that, which is, once again, not being accountable for their own behavior, not having concern for how that's going to feel. And then I think we can't overlook the idea of sexual exploitation, within the relationship in terms of manipulating sexual access. People have a lot of hang-ups about sex. People have a lot of shame about sex. So it's a really powerful place to control somebody's sense of well-being, I think.
Well, Brandee Smith, thank you for being on our show today and answering the questions of our audience. And for everyone who is listening, you can reach Brandee at fortifycounselingservices.com. She is out of Austin, Texas. She is statewide online. And thank you for being on the show. Before you leave, do you have any last words for everyone about you, your services, or something that they want to know about this type of abuse?
No, I just, I'm just really grateful to do this work. I'm grateful to be able to talk about it. I'm glad that people are talking about it more in general mental health, but also abuse and surviving abuse. And so I'm glad. I really appreciate what you're doing and the courage of the people who tell you their story and all that's shared. I think it really helps to decrease the stigma around, and the more educated we are about this, the easier it is to see, the easier it is to protect ourselves from. And so I'm grateful, for you and your audience doing what you guys are doing. I think it's important to stay centered and in terms of just general kind of wellness, trust your instinct. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably not. And so trust yourself in that way. Have a support network of people who you trust and who you can talk to. And as a therapist, I think that's sort of my bottom line. Talk to somebody.
Well, Brandee, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone listening today. And I hope you all have a great night.